The bay gelding went down in the creek with both front knees folded under him, and Josephine Mercer knew that asking him to rise again would kill him. Water rushed around his chest. His breath came in broken pulls. Behind her, somewhere above the cottonwoods, a rider shouted her name. Another answered with a rifle shot that struck stone instead of flesh. The gelding tried to gather himself. Josephine caught the bridle close to the bit and forced his head down before panic made him drown in 6 inches of water. "No," she said. "You've carried me far enough." The horse's nostrils flared against her wrist. He had run since before daylight through cedar breaks, shale cuts, and one narrow pass where Clive Danner had come close enough to seize the back of her coat. The left side of Josephine's face was stiff with dried blood from a cut at her temple. Both palms were raw. Her left knee had swollen beneath her skirt, after the gelding slipped on the mountain trail. None of it mattered as much as the animal under her hands, the iron hidden beneath her coat, pressed against her ribs. In the satchel at her hip, a small copper bell lay wrapped so tightly in wool that its clapper could not sound. 2 objects Danner wanted back, 1 living horse she would not sacrifice to keep them. "Mercer," Danner's voice carried down the slope. "You're out of mountain." Josephine loosened the cinch. The saddle slid into the creek with a heavy splash. She pulled the bedroll free, took the canteen, and left the rest. The gelding's legs trembled, but once the weight came off, he rolled onto one hip and dragged his nose above the current. Josephine poured water into her palm. He swallowed twice. She gave him no more. Too much would be another kind of cruelty. Hooves broke brush upstream. Josephine looked toward the opposite bank. A narrow cattle path climbed through the trees to a weathered line cabin tucked beneath a rise. Smoke lifted from the stone chimney. Someone was there. That did not mean safety. Danner wore a commission in his coat and used it like a key. Men saw paper, heard the word stock detective, and stopped asking whether the authority was still alive. Josephine crossed the creek anyway. Her knee nearly failed on the first step up the bank. She caught a willow branch, pulled herself higher, and kept moving. The bell struck her hip without making a sound. Behind her, the gelding remained in the water, head raised, alive. That had to be enough. The cabin door opened before Josephine reached it. A tall man stepped onto the porch with a rifle in one hand, and no hurry in the rest of him. His hat threw shadow across a face cut by wind and work. A pale scar ran along the right side of his jaw. He did not call out. He watched Josephine climb the last yards as if he were counting every place she might fall. She made it to the porch post. Her fingers missed the wood. The ground came up hard, and she landed at his boots. The man set the rifle against the wall instead of reaching for her. "Can you hear me?" Josephine pushed onto one elbow. "Horse, yours, creak." Her breath scraped. "Do not ride him." The man's eyes went past her toward the trees. "I won't." Hooves entered the clearing. Danner came first on a dark roan, his right cheek marked by a fresh scrape where Josephine had struck him with the running iron 2 nights earlier. 2 riders followed, both armed. Danner reined in 10 paces from the porch. Calder, the man beside Josephine, rose. Danner, so they knew each other. Not well enough for warmth, too well for surprise. Danner drew a folded paper from his coat and held it up. This woman stole property from a lawful stock operation and assaulted an officer in the performance of his duty. Gideon Calder did not look at the paper. "What office?" "Territorial stock detective." "Your commission expired 2 years ago." One of Danner's riders shifted in the saddle. Danner's mouth hardened. "You planning to test that in the dirt?" Gideon's attention moved to Josephine. He did not ask whether she had stolen anything. He did not ask whether Danner deserved the cut on his face. "Do you go with him willingly?" Josephine forced her voice steady. "No." Danner stepped down from the saddle. "She's lying." "Then find a sheriff and tell him. Voss will strip Iron Pine of every freight contract it has. Iron Pine belongs to Ruth Kessler." Gideon's voice stayed level. "You can threaten her yourself." Danner's hand moved toward his revolver. Gideon's rope was already open. The loop crossed the space before Danner cleared leather. It caught him high around the arms and chest. Gideon turned once, pulled, and brought him off balance without dragging him beneath the horse. Danner struck the ground on one shoulder. The 2 riders raised rifles. Gideon placed one boot on the rope and picked up his own rifle from the wall. "You can fire," he said, "but he is between us, and you'll answer to Ruth for every hole in her cabin." Neither man fired. Gideon took Danner's revolver, opened the cylinder, and dropped the cartridges into his own pocket. Then he returned the empty gun to Danner's holster. "Mount." "You think this pays what you owe me?" Danner asked. Gideon's face changed by less than a breath. "I haven't promised forever. I promised this moment." He loosened the rope enough for Danner to stand, but not enough for him to turn freely. One of the riders helped Danner into the saddle. Gideon kept the rope until all 3 horses faced the trail. "The next paper you bring had better carry Sheriff Sloane's name." Danner looked past him to Josephine. "You cannot hide the Mercer woman from what her father was." Josephine pushed to her knees. "My father is dead. You still need him to frighten people." Danner's scraped cheek darkened. "Voss will have the iron back." Josephine did not answer. The running iron rested beneath her coat. The bell stayed silent in her satchel. Danner rode out. His men followed. Gideon waited until the hoofbeats faded, then set down the rifle. He still did not touch Josephine. "My name is Gideon Calder," he said. "May I check your head?" She measured the distance between them. "The horse first." "All right." He called toward the rear of the cabin. A young hand appeared from a lean-to, wide-eyed but ready. Gideon sent him to the creek with water, oats, and instructions not to force the gelding up. Only then did he crouch several feet from Josephine. "May I?" She nodded once. His fingers parted the hair near her temple without pressing the cut. He smelled of leather, cold air, and wood smoke. Nothing sweet, nothing falsely gentle. "You need water," he said. Slowly, the door, latches from inside. "Show me." Gideon stood, stepped into the cabin, and left the doorway open. Josephine rose using the porch post. Her knee shook. He did not take her arm until she said, "Now." Then he gave her only enough support to cross the threshold. Inside, he showed her the wooden bar and waited while she dropped it into place herself. When Josephine removed her coat, the running iron slipped free and struck the floorboards. Gideon's gaze fixed on the flattened tip and the small crescent punch near its neck. He did not reach for it. Josephine put one hand over the metal. "You know it? I've seen what one like it leaves behind." "Where?" Gideon looked toward the barred door, where Danner's absence felt temporary, not a story for a woman about to faint. "That is not your decision." "No." He set a cup of water within reach and moved back. "When you wake, you tell me whether I may look at it." Josephine woke with one hand over the running iron, and the other pressed against the satchel at her hip. The cabin door remained barred from inside. Morning light had moved across the floorboards far enough to tell her she had slept through most of a day, perhaps more. Her mouth tasted of dust and iron. The cut at her temple had stiffened. Her left knee throbbed when she tried to straighten it. Outside, someone split wood in slow, even strokes. Josephine listened for Danner's voice, for horses moving beyond the wall, for the click of a latch being tested from the other side. Nothing. Only the axe. Only wind along the roof. She sat up and checked the objects before trusting the room. The running iron was intact. Narrow rod, flattened point, crescent punch near the neck. The copper bell remained wrapped in wool, its cracked rawhide strap folded beneath it. The clapper had not sounded. Gideon Calder had not taken either one. A cup of water stood where he had left it. Josephine drank half, waited, then finished the rest. She lifted the bar and opened the door. Gideon sat on a chopping block several yards away, repairing a broken halter. His rifle leaned against the cabin wall within reach, but he did not rise when she appeared. "How long?" she asked. "Since yesterday afternoon." "September 23rd, then." "The horse alive." Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. Slipped the halter across his knee. He stood some time before dawn. No broken leg. "He is in the lower pen with water, a little hay, and no saddle." Josephine stepped onto the porch. Her knee wavered once. Gideon's hand moved, then stopped before leaving his thigh. "May I bring the chair?" "Yes." He placed it near the porch post and moved back. Josephine sat. From there she could see the lower pen through the cottonwoods. The bay gelding stood with his head low, one hind leg resting, alive because no one had forced him to prove it too soon. 3 days before anyone rides him, she said. Longer if he shortens his stride. I told the boy the same. You knew? I know what exhaustion looks like. He did not claim more. Josephine removed the running iron from beneath her coat and laid it across her lap. You asked to look. Gideon waited. You may touch it. He came closer and crouched where she could see both hands. He lifted the iron by the cooler end, turning it toward the light. Soot remained in the seam near the flattened tip. Grease darkened the neck. The crescent punch looked shallow enough to miss, unless a person knew where to search. You have seen one before, Josephine said. Not this one. You said you had seen what it leaves behind, years ago. Remount horses came through with marks that did not heal the way honest brands heal. New lines over old ones. Width wrong at the edges. Scar tissue pulled twice. Where? Gideon's thumb stopped short of the crescent. Army contract stock. Near Fort Union. His gaze lifted. Why ask that? Because Danner knew the remount roads. Gideon handed the iron back instead of keeping it while he questioned her. Josephine slid it beneath her coat again. 3 nights ago I found a remuda in a narrow basin west of the high ridge. More than 30 horses. Maybe 40. Danner was at the fire with this iron. You saw him use it? On a roan. Broken circle brand underneath. Fresh bar drawn across the open side. Who else? 4 men in the basin. 2 more on the north trail. Feed sacks carried Voss's mark. Papers were kept in a tin case beside the fire. Did you see Roland Voss? No. Gideon absorbed the limit without arguing past it. Then you know his men, his feed, and his papers were there. Not that he was. That is what I said. It matters. I know it matters, Josephine's voice sharpened. My father lost everything because men preferred a clean accusation to a difficult fact. Gideon did not ask what happened to Abram Mercer. Not yet. How did you get the iron? Danner left it near the trough while he and another man moved a mare from the lower pen. I took it and ran. The mare named Lark. Yes. Tell me about her. Josephine looked toward the lower pen, though the horse there was not the one in her memory. Bay. White hook beneath the jaw. Old wire scar across the left shoulder. She leads mares without fighting them. If she chooses water, the others follow. If she stops at a bad crossing, the young horses wait. How long has she been gone? 4 years. She was taken with the Mercer herd. Your father's. His on paper. Mine in every hour that mattered. The answer came before caution could soften it. Josephine let it stand. He bred Lark from a cavalry mare and a ranch stud no one wanted because he was too narrow through the chest. She learned faster than any horse we owned. Gideon glanced toward the satchel. The bell belonged to her. Josephine placed one hand over it. My father tied it on her when she began leading the yearlings. I made the strap smaller as she grew. 3 nights ago, after I took the iron, I heard a mare answer from the dark. One call. I rang this once, muffled under my coat. She answered again. Then Danner heard it too. He heard enough to know someone was near, and you rapped the clapper. Before I ran, Gideon stood and moved to the porch rail. You have choices. Josephine almost laughed. Men said that when they meant the opposite. Name them. You can stay here until your knee holds and your horse recovers. I can send the boy to Iron Pine for supplies and say nothing else. Danner knows this cabin. He does. Next, I can send a rider to Sheriff Emmett Sloan with your account. He may be in Las Vegas. He may be somewhere else in the county. A rider will lose time finding him. And the third? Iron Pine is 6 miles by road. Ruth Kessler owns it. I work her remuda for wages. She has men, corrals, records, and 12 horses bought from Voss last week. 4 may be carrying the same kind of healing marks you described. Josephine studied him. You would take me there by wagon. Your horse can walk behind without weight once he is steady enough, and the iron stays with you. No Sloan yet. Your choice. Danner may reach Iron Pine first, then Ruth will hear both stories. Gideon picked up the repaired halter. She does not frighten easily. A rider appeared on the north trail before Josephine answered. He came fast but not recklessly, a lean man on a sweat-dark chestnut. Gideon took 1 step away from the porch so the rider would not have to crowd Josephine to speak. From Iron Pine, the man said. Mrs. Kessler sent me. 4 of the Voss geldings have marks healing wrong. Amos found one split under the hair. She wants you back before noon tomorrow. Keep the 12 separate, Gideon said. No one rides them. No one sells them. Tell Ruth to hold the unpaid half of Voss's price. The rider glanced at Josephine, then at the shape beneath her coat. "And if Voss comes?" "Tell him the horses are under inspection." "By who?" Gideon looked at Josephine. He left the answer hers. She rose from the chair despite the pull in her knee. "By someone who knows what a stolen name looks like after men try to burn another over it." The rider nodded once. No pity, no disbelief. Just a message received. Josephine turned to Gideon. "The wagon, at first light. The bay walks behind, no saddle." Agreed. She touched the iron beneath her coat, then the silent bell at her hip. By noon the next day, Iron Pine would have horses carrying an answer in their skin. The gray gelding answered before anyone spoke. He stood in Iron Pine's north corral, with one dark ear turned toward the wagon, his right front hoof resting lightly on the ground, as if the old split still troubled him after hard miles. Josephine saw the pale line in the hoof, the faint burn across his chest, and the place where longer hair hit a bullet graze along his ribs. By the time Gideon set the brake, she already knew the newer Barvey brand was not the first mark the horse had carried. The bay gelding from the creek walked behind the wagon without a saddle. His stride was even though tired. A ranch hand led him toward a shaded pen and did not ask him for more. Josephine stepped down with one hand on the wagon rail. Her left knee held until her boot touched dirt, then stiffened. Gideon moved close enough to catch her if she fell, but waited. Josephine found her balance on her own. "Better light," she said. A woman in a dark work dress came from the ranch house, carrying a ledger under one arm. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned without ornament, and her eyes went first to Josephine's face, then to the iron-shaped weight beneath her coat. "Ruth Kessler," she said. "You need a chair, water, or better light?" "Better light." Ruth nodded toward the open-sided shed beside the corral. "Then we start there." 4 of the 12 Voss horses had already been separated. The gray came first. Amos Pike, the hand with the red scarf at his neck, brought him under the shed roof with a lead rope held short. "He came sound," Amos said. "No fever, no swelling. Brand looks ugly, but ugly isn't stolen." Josephine approached the horse from the shoulder and let him smell the back of her hand. "No, ugly is not proof." Amos watched as if he had expected an argument. Josephine crouched near the right front hoof. The knee protested, but she kept her weight on the other leg. "The split is old. See the pale edge? It has grown down from the coronet." She rose and moved to the chest. "Harness burn, older still." She parted the longer hair on the gray's right side. Beneath it lay a narrow white crease, bullet graze. Amos's skepticism thin. "You know this horse?" "I know the description." Josephine wet the hair over the left hip and combed it aside with her fingers. The Barvey sat dark over a fainter pair of curves. The lower edge of the newer brand had pulled the old scar upward. "Double C underneath," she said. Ruth opened the ledger. "Can you prove when the second brand was laid?" "Not to a day. I can show it healed later." Amos folded his arms. "A scar is a scar once the hair grows." Josephine turned toward a black gelding in the next pen. "Bring him." Amos hesitated, then obeyed. The black carried an honest ranch brand, clean and even. Josephine guided Amos's hand to the lower edge of the scar. "Use your fingertips, not your eyes." He touched the mark. Smooth now the gray. Amos ran his fingers over the bar V. His hand stopped where the newer line crossed the old double C, raised. "And tighter at the edge," Josephine said. "2 healing ages. 2 separate injuries." Amos looked back at the black gelding and tested the mark again without being told. "So the top brand came later?" "Yes." "That proves theft?" "No." Josephine straightened. "It proves alteration. Ownership takes records, descriptions, witnesses, bills of sale, and someone willing to put a name beside the truth." Ruth wrote that down. Gideon had not spoken during the examination. He stood by the shed post while Josephine worked, keeping the other hands back and the horses calm. When she shifted her weight, because her knee had begun to ache, a water bucket appeared near her boot. He did not tell anyone he had moved it. The second horse was a chestnut with an old forked brand buried beneath a straight bar. The third, a dun, carried dried mud thick across one hip, though the weather had been clear for days. When Josephine washed it away, the skin beneath showed a dark, uneven line still healing. The fourth gelding had a brand that looked proper from 10 feet and wrong from 2, one stroke narrower than the others, the scar tissue pinched where a flattened point had been drawn over older flesh. Josephine did not remove the running iron from beneath her coat. She did not need to. 4 altered, Ruth said when the inspection ended. Out of 12. 4 I can defend under questioning, Josephine replied. The others stay separate until they are checked again. Voss will demand his payment, Gideon finally spoke. He can demand it. Ruth looked at him. The unpaid half remains here. All 12 stay off work, Gideon said. No trail rides, no sale, no one removes them without your order. Ruth turned to Amos. 2 riders, one to the Double C, one to Justice Hale in Bracken Pass. Take written descriptions before anyone comes near the gray. Amos nodded. And if Voss sends men? Count them, Ruth said. Do not fire first, Gideon added. Do not let Danner's men near the pens even with paper. Hale or Sheriff Sloan can send written direction if they want stock moved. Josephine watched the orders become action. Gates were chained. Feed was shifted. A hand began a fresh page in the ranch ledger with the date, the number of horses, their brands, and the names of those present. No one asked Josephine to be grateful. They asked her what the evidence required. By afternoon on September 25th, the gray had his own holding entry. Ruth read it aloud before signing. No riding, no sale, no removal, no injury while under Iron Pine custody, and no transfer without written direction from Hale or Sloan. Josephine added one line beneath it. Condition of right front hoof observed before confinement. Ruth passed her the pen. Josephine signed as witness. Only then did Ruth lead her to the tack room. A black iron strongbox sat beneath the saddle racks. It had 2 locks set 6 inches apart. Ruth held the left key. Josephine drew the right key from a cord beneath her dress. Once it goes in, Ruth said, neither of us opens it alone. Josephine removed the running iron from under her coat. Soot still clung near the flattened tip. Grease marked the neck around the crescent punch. Ruth laid a clean cloth inside the box. Josephine placed the tool on it herself. They wrote an inventory before closing the lid. 1 narrow iron, flattened point, crescent maker's punch, soot and grease present, deposited by Josephine Mercer, witnessed by Ruth Kessler. Both locks turned. Ruth kept her key. Josephine returned hers beneath her dress. The copper bell remained in her satchel. She would not lock away the only sound Lark might still answer. Sunset reddened the west wall of the barn when a ranch boy came running from the old logging road. He was 14 at most, breathless and pale beneath the dust. Tracks, he said. More than 20 horses. Maybe twice that. They crossed the North Wash and took the old road northeast. Gideon was already reaching for his hat. How fresh, manure still wet in the shade. Josephine stepped into the yard. Her knee objected, but the ache no longer mattered. Did they move loose? No, Mom. Close together. Like men were pushing them. Gideon looked toward the darkening ridge. They are moving the herd. Ruth rested one hand on the strongbox key at her belt. The iron stays here tonight. Yes, Josephine said. The evidence was locked, the gray was held. Voss had lost control of part of what could expose him. But beyond Iron Pine, more than 20 living horses were already disappearing into the mountains. Sua. The herd had half a night's lead by the time Josephine reached the Iron Pine yard before sunrise on September 26th. 3 saddled horses waited near the pump, their breath pale in the cold. Amos Pike held the chestnut Gideon had chosen for her, a long-striding gelding built to cover ground. Josephine watched him take 2 steps and shook her head. He reaches too far downhill. Amos glanced at her swollen left knee. He's the fastest horse here. Fast will not matter if I cannot stay in the saddle by noon. She pointed to a plain bay mare, tied beside the corral, narrow through the shoulders, with short cannon bones and feet that landed square. That one. Amos looked toward Gideon, waiting for him to settle it. Gideon lifted Josephine's saddle from the chestnut and carried it to the bay. The mare goes with Miss Mercer. No argument, no indulgence either. A working decision accepted because she had given a working reason. The running iron remained behind 2 locks in the tack room strongbox. Ruth wore the left key at her belt. Josephine carried the right beneath her dress. The copper bell stayed muffled inside her satchel. She checked both facts before mounting. Gideon took Amos and Will Baines, the second Iron Pine hand, who had helped hold the disputed horses. 4 riders, enough to read a trail and watch one another. Not enough to turn the mountain into a warning. They followed the old logging road northeast, while frost still held in the shade. The ranch boys' discovery showed clearly at first. More than 20 horses had crossed the North Wash in a packed column, hooves driving damp soil into dark ridges. Beyond the wash, wagon ruts faded beneath pine needles and the signs grew smaller. Josephine slowed the bay mare near a young pine leaning across the road. 3 branches had been cut clean at the height of a mounted rider's face. "Not stormbreak," Amos said. No, Josephine touched the pale wood. They shortened the path because they expected to use it again. 50 yards farther, manure had been trampled into a narrow strip instead of scattered across the road. The animals had not traveled loose. They had been pushed close enough that one horse's mistake would spread through the whole string. Gideon crouched beside a drag mark running along the edge of the trail. "Rope or a pole used to close the side," Josephine said. They were keeping the herd narrow. "Moving fast? Faster than the ground allows. We'll look toward the ridge." Because Iron Pine held their horses, Josephine mounted again. Because Voss expected someone to notice before the sale. The trail climbed into broken timber where the bay mare began choosing her feet rather than accepting the old road. Josephine let her. Once, when the mare tested loose stone and shifted sideways, Gideon's horse came level. He said nothing. He only moved to the exposed side until the footing steadied, then dropped back again. By late morning, the tracks led behind a screen of deadfall to a shelf hidden beneath dark pines. Men had dragged rough rails between trees to make a temporary night pen. It stood empty. The ground inside had been churned into a hard gray basin. At the rear, a branding fire sat cold in a shallow ring of stones. Josephine dismounted and knelt beside it. Her knee resisted the bend, so she kept most of her weight on the other leg. Ash broke beneath her fingers. Burned horsehair clung to one blackened rock. A bitter animal smell remained beneath the smoke. "They altered more here," she said. Amos removed his hat. "After they delivered stock to us." "Likely after." Josephine searched the edge of the fire. Someone had stamped dirt across it, but the work had been hurried. A crescent of soot remained on one stone, and beside the upper rail she found a twist of tobacco wrapped in brown paper and tied with red thread. Gideon saw it in her hand. His face gave almost nothing away. "Almost, Danner?" she asked. "He buys that twist from a trader south of Las Vegas. You know his tobacco." "I know the man." Josephine rose. "How well?" Gideon looked toward the timber above them. "Well enough to know he does not leave much by accident." "That is not the answer I asked for." "No." His gaze moved across the exposed shelf, the high rocks, the single narrow entrance. "And this is not the ground for the rest. The cabin was not the time. Bracken Pass was not the place. Now this ridge is not the ground." "You will have it," Gideon said. "Somewhere with walls and no rifles above us." The rifle cracked before Josephine could answer. Bark burst from the pine beside the bay mare's head. The mare spun toward the edge of the shelf. Josephine let the reins slide through her fingers instead of jerking the bit. She brought one hand low, turned the mare's nose toward open ground, and gave her room to recover her feet. Gideon moved 2 steps toward the bridle. "I have her," Josephine said. He stopped at once. The mare trembled beneath Josephine's hand but did not bolt. Gideon turned toward the ridge instead, rifle raised. Amos and Will had taken cover behind the pen rails. No second shot came. Danner's voice carried from somewhere among the rocks. "Still spending what you owe me, Calder?" Gideon's thumb rested near the rifle hammer. "Come down and ask." Danner laughed. "Not while the Mercer woman is choosing your ground." Josephine searched the ridge for movement. Nothing but wind in the pines. Danner had watched long enough to see Gideon stop when she refused help. He had watched long enough to understand that Gideon was no longer directing every choice. A dark horse crossed a gap above them and vanished east. Amos moved toward his gelding. "We can catch him before the north cut." "No," Josephine said. He stopped. She walked to the upper edge of the pen. The churned earth beyond it did not hold one departure trail. 3 lines split through the timber. One climbed east into broken rock. One dropped north toward a narrow ravine. The third bent west in the direction of Bracken Pass. "He wants us divided," she said. Gideon came beside her, leaving enough space for her to see every route. "Or he wants us to choose the wrong one." "Both." Amos frowned at the trails. If we wait, they gain another half-day. If 4 riders divide 3 ways, Josephine said, Danner gains all of us. The decision cost more than her voice showed. Lark might be traveling one of those routes at that very moment. Josephine forced herself to search the pen before leaving. Near the rear rail, half pressed into wet earth, a curved piece of copper caught the light. She lifted it between 2 fingers, a hair clasp bent nearly flat. One edge carried a small V-shaped notch. Josephine had cut that notch herself because the clasp slipped from Lark's mane, unless the rawhide tie caught inside it. Several dark bay hairs remained wound around the copper. She rubbed one between finger and thumb. It bent without breaking. "How old?" Gideon asked. "No more than 3 days." He did not tell her what the clasp already proved. Lark had been in the pen. Josephine closed her hand around the copper. "We go back. We'll look toward the eastern trail, without following any of them, without pretending hope is a map." Josephine mounted. "We return with more riders, better knowledge of the cuts, and a reason not to lose every witness before dark." Gideon lowered his rifle. "We return." Danner did not fire again. That troubled Josephine more than another bullet would have. He had not meant to kill them. He had meant to hurry them into making his decision for him. They reached Iron Pine near sunset. Dust lay thick on the horses, and Josephine's knee had stiffened until she needed both hands on the saddle horn to dismount. Gideon stood near enough to stop a fall, but did not touch her. Ruth met them beside the barn with a rider from Bracken Pass. The man held a broadside folded lengthwise. These went up at the livery, the store, and 2 boarding houses. Ruth opened the paper beneath the lantern. $50 reward for information leading to Josephine Mercer's detention and the return of stolen property. Horse theft, assault, flight from lawful authority. The final line was printed larger than the rest. Daughter of the known rustler, Abram Mercer. Josephine read every word. Justice Hale's name was absent. Sheriff Sloan's name was absent. No county seal, no warrant. Only Voss's money and Danner's accusation. "Private paper," Gideon said. "Hale will know the difference." Josephine folded the notice along its original crease. "By the time Hale says so, half of Bracken Pass may have decided it is true." The bent copper clasp pressed into her palm. Lark was alive and moving through the mountains. By morning, Josephine might be hunted not only by Danner's riders, but by decent people who believed they were helping the law. Josephine carried Voss's reward notice into Bracken Pass without folding it smaller. By the time the Iron Pine wagon reached the livery on September 27th, the paper had softened at the edges in her hand, but every accusation remained visible. Horse theft, assault, flight from lawful authority, daughter of the known rustler Abram Mercer. Men outside the feed store had already read those words. Some turned away when she stepped down. Others watched with the sharp interest reserved for a woman who might become either witness or spectacle before noon. Her left knee caught when her boot touched the street. Ruth offered an elbow. Josephine used it for 3 steps, then released it. Gideon rode behind the wagon with Amos and Will leading the gray gelding. The horse wore no saddle. Justice Hale had sent a written request for a witnessed inspection, and Ruth carried that paper inside her coat. Nothing about the gray's temporary removal from Iron Pine had been trusted to memory. Josephine stopped beside the livery wall. Another copy of Voss's notice had been nailed near the door. She worked the tack free with the point of her knife and placed that sheet behind the first. She did not tear either one. "Hale first," she said. Justice Hale's office stood behind a narrow porch facing the main road. Roland Voss was already inside. His dark coat showed no dust across the shoulders. His gloves rested beside Hale's ledger, as if he had come to discuss freight prices rather than a hunted woman. Hale sat behind the desk with his spectacles low on his nose. "Miss Mercer," he said, "Mr. Voss has made a complaint." Josephine laid both reward notices flat before him. "Did you sign these?" "No. Did Sheriff Sloan?" "Not that I know." Voss leaned back with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting for weaker people to lose control. "A private reward does not require a justice's permission." "Neither does a lie," Josephine said. The porch had begun to fill behind Ruth and Gideon. Josephine turned enough that no one could later say she had hidden from the charge. I took a running iron from a camp used by Clive Danner. I saw Danner use it to alter a horse's brand. His commission had expired and he pursued me after I escaped. I struck him while getting free. Those are facts I will swear to." Voss's mouth curved without warmth. "You omitted your father." "No." Josephine's voice remained steady. "Abram Mercer was accused of rustling. His herd was seized. He died before he cleared his name." A murmur crossed the porch. She continued before Voss could own it. "An accusation does not become proof because the accused is dead." "Stolen horses were found on Mercer land," Voss said, "after my father reported altered brands moving on contract roads. A convenient defense. Then inspect the horses." Hale glanced toward the street. "That gray came from Iron Pine." Ruth removed his written request and placed it beside the notices. "Bought from Voss. Held under dispute. Brought here for this inspection only." Voss's attention sharpened. "You removed my property without permission." "I withheld the unpaid half of your price," Ruth replied. "Property is what we are here to determine." A woman stepped from beside the general store. Martha Red wore a plain brown dress and carried herself with the stiffness of someone who had spent the morning rehearsing courage. "That horse may be mine." Voss looked toward the gray. "You recognize an animal from across the street?" "I recognize the ear." Josephine faced Hale. "Record her description before she goes near him." Hale opened his ledger to a clean page. "Mrs. Red, state every mark you remember without looking closer." Martha clasped her hands. "One ear nearly black. Split in the right front hoof. Old harness burn across the chest from before my husband bought him. A bullet graze on the right side, hidden when his winter coat grows. Double C brand on the left hip." Hale dipped his pen again. "Anything else?" Martha swallowed. "He searches coat pockets for sugar. My husband taught him." Josephine nodded to Gideon. He brought the gray forward but stopped 10 feet from Martha. Josephine checked the hoof first. The pale split remained. She parted the hair across the chest and showed Hale the old harness scar. Along the right ribs, beneath longer hair, lay the narrow bullet crease. Last came the brand. Josephine wet the gray's hip, worked the hair aside, and showed how the newer Barvey sat over 2 older curves. The lower stroke had healed at a different age. "Double C," Hale said. Voss did not look at the scar. "A horse can change owners lawfully." "Then your bill of sale should show where he came from," Ruth said. "It does not." Josephine stepped away from the gray. "Mrs. Red, call him." Martha made 3 low notes through her teeth. The gelding's head rose. He crossed the distance before Gideon could lead him, and pushed his nose against Martha's left coat pocket. Her breath broke. She drew out a lump of sugar wrapped in cloth. The horse took it from her palm. No one cheered. The reaction was smaller and more honest. The storekeeper removed Voss's notice from his window. A man near the hitch rail said, "One familiar horse did not clear the Mercer name." Another told him to wait for Hale's record. Belief had not changed sides. It had lost its certainty. Hale took Martha's sworn statement and recorded every mark before allowing anyone else near the gray. He then read Ruth's holding entry, noted that the gelding had not been ridden or sold after the dispute, and signed a return direction. "The horse goes back to Iron Pine today. He remains there until corroborating statements reach me or Sheriff Sloan directs otherwise." Martha's disappointment showed, but she nodded. "Then do it lawfully." Amos and Will led the gray out before sunset, with Hale's signed paper folded inside Gideon's coat. The gelding would be back behind Iron Pine rails that night. He did not remain in Bracken Pass. He did not go with Voss. Outside Hale's office, Voss caught Josephine near the alley. Ruth and Gideon stopped several paces back. Neither stepped between them. "Return the iron," Voss said. "Leave New Mexico territory. The reward disappears, and no one follows you farther. The horses remain stolen. You cannot rebuild your father by ruining yourself." "I am not rebuilding him." Josephine met his gaze. "I am stopping you." Voss's control thinned. "Iron Pine has withheld money that belongs to me. Buyers in Las Vegas have advances tied to my next sale. If that shipment stalls, freight men close their books, contracts go elsewhere, and every ranch foolish enough to stand beside you pays for it." There it was. Not wounded pride alone. Credit. Contracts. A sale that had to close before questions reached the buyers. "Then you should have sold honest horses," Josephine said. Voss glanced toward Gideon. Ask Calder why Danner believes a debt can be called in. Josephine did not turn. What debt? That is his confession to make. Voss drew on his gloves. But understand this. Men rarely hide their worst choices from enemies. They hide them from the people whose trust they want. He walked away before Gideon approached. Josephine waited until Voss crossed the street. Is he lying? Gideon's answer came without defense. No. What do you owe Danner? Not here. The mountain was not the place. Now the town is not the place. Gideon accepted the charge. No, then tell me where. Somewhere he cannot use the ground around us. Josephine studied him. That sounds like delay. It is delay. Deliberate. Yes. He did not ask her to mistake honesty about silence for honesty itself. That night, Josephine stayed in a boarding room behind the store. Her temple cut had scabbed. The knee held if she did not ask it for speed. The running iron remained 6 miles away in Iron Pine's 2-key strongbox. Ruth kept the left key. Josephine's right key hung beneath her dress. The bent copper clasp lay wrapped in cloth inside her pocket. The bell rested in her satchel. After the street settled, Josephine went into the yard behind the boarding house. Gideon stood near the corner but did not follow. If Danner hears it, he asked. Then he learns I am still looking. She loosened the wool from the clapper and raised the bell. One clear note crossed Bracken Pass and faded against the foothills. Josephine waited until the cold tightened her lungs. Nothing answered. Then, from the mountain darkness northeast of town, a mare called once. Josephine closed her hand around the bell. Lark was alive, close enough to hear home. By dawn on September 29th, Josephine had turned one mare's distant answer into a direction, a route, and a decision. The day before had been spent without drama and without waste. Iron Pine's riders compared the old logging cuts. Justice Hale's copies were secured, the horses were rested, and Ruth packed enough food for 2 days. The running iron remained behind both locks in the tackroom strongbox. Josephine carried only her right key beneath her dress, the bent copper clasp in her pocket, and Lark's bell muffled inside her satchel. Gideon did not ask whether she was ready. He checked the bay mare's girth, then stepped aside so Josephine could test the shorter left stirrup herself. Her knee still resisted a deep bend, but it held. Amos Pike and Will Baines waited near the north road. 4 riders again, no wagon, no spare men to lose. The answer came beyond the north shoulder, Josephine said. If they moved after hearing it, they would choose water and cover. Gideon looked toward the dark ridge. You lead. Bracken Pass disappeared behind them as the trail climbed through cold mist. Near the first wash, Josephine found more than 30 tracks packed together. One set lay cleaner beneath the others, placed with less hesitation over stones and roots. Amos leaned from his saddle. Lead horse? Lead mare, likely. Josephine traced the edge of one print. The first animal chose the ground. The rest followed. Lark? Not enough to say. She mounted again. But Lark never wasted a step. The tracks crossed the wash, vanished over stone, then returned where bark had been rubbed from young pines. By afternoon, the trail tightened between 2 ridges. Light reached the gap only in thin strips. Beyond it, the ground dropped into a basin they could not see. Gideon studied the rocks above. Could be the meadow. Could be a funnel, Josephine said. Will glanced at the sinking sun. We can reach it before dark. We can reach the entrance, Josephine replied. That is not the same as knowing what waits inside. She chose a camp below the ridge where the horses could drink, and no fire would show from the upper trail. The decision cost her another night with Lark somewhere close, but haste had already taken enough from her life. Gideon accepted first watch. Josephine slept with the bell beneath her coat, and woke once to find him facing the pass, not the bedroll at her back. Before sunrise on September 30th, they climbed the gap on foot and led the horses behind them. The basin opened near noon. Stone enclosed it on 3 sides. Rough rails closed the 4th. More than 30 horses stood within the hidden meadow, some grazing, others shifting along the fence with the restlessness of animals moved too often. Several hips carried scars too dark or too uneven to be honest brands. Josephine saw Lark near the center, bay coat dulled by dust, white hook beneath the jaw, old wire scar across the left shoulder. The mares around her moved when she moved and settled when she stopped. Josephine's hand found the bell through the satchel. Gideon came down behind her. There may be men above the pen, there may be. Let Amos and Will circle. Not yet. If riders show on both sides, the herd bunches. She dismounted and approached the lower fence. Gideon stayed several paces back. Amos and Will took cover among the rocks with rifles low. Josephine knelt where Lark could see her through the rails. The injured knee shook, but she kept her balance. She pulled the wool from the clapper and rang once. The note traveled across the basin. Lark's head rose. One ear came forward. Josephine rang again. The mare left the center of the herd. A chestnut crowded her shoulder, but Lark pinned an ear and continued. Josephine held out her hand. Come on, girl. Lark reached the fence and breathed across her fingers. The mare searched Josephine's face, uncertain at first, then pressed her muzzle into Josephine's palm. Josephine touched the white hook beneath her jaw. Years of absence remained years. They did not vanish because one horse remembered. You found me, Josephine said. Lark's hide trembled under her hand. 3 mares drifted toward the fence behind her. Josephine looked toward the lower gate. If we open there and let Lark walk, the others may follow without crowding. Gideon studied the slope beyond it. Open ground for 50 yards, enough to spread. Then we do it your way. A voice came from the rocks above. You always did let someone else choose until the choice cost blood. Danner stepped into the lower opening, with one hand near his revolver. Movement showed at the upper rail. One mounted man waited behind the fence. Another lay among the pines with a rifle across a stone. Amos and Will shifted under cover. Danner smiled at Gideon, 4 against 3. Better odds than the canyon. Gideon moved between him and Josephine without touching her. Leave. And hand over 30 head because the Mercer woman rang a bell. Danner's gaze found Lark. That mare has caused trouble before. Josephine stood. She recognized what belonged to her. Horses belong to whoever holds the paper. Then show yours to Sheriff Sloan. Danner laughed. You think he'll take her word over mine? Not only hers, Gideon said. You are standing beside altered brands. Danner's hand dropped. Gideon's rope opened before the revolver cleared leather. The loop caught Danner across the upper arms and chest. Gideon turned hard, pulled, and took him off balance. Danner struck the grass. His revolver landed near the fence. Gideon kicked it away, crossed the distance, and bound Danner's wrists in front of him. Then he ran the tether through the saddle horn of Danner's horse. Amos kept his rifle trained on the upper rider. Will watched the timber. No one fired. Lark remained near Josephine, but the herd had lifted its heads. Open the gate, Josephine said. We move them now. Gideon checked the knot. The rifleman has the opening. Then keep Danner between us and the ridge until the herd clears. Danner pushed himself upright on bound knees. You owe me your life. Gideon's hand stopped. Not today. You said that before. Danner looked toward Josephine. He was trapped under an army horse outside Fort Union. Saddle pinned his leg. The patrol kept riding because rounds were breaking stone above us. I came back. Josephine turned to Gideon. He saved you. Yes, one word. No excuse. Danner leaned against the saddle. Ask what a life is worth, Mercer. It is not worth 30 stolen horses, no. It is worth one man remembering who paid first. Josephine faced Gideon. Keep him tied. The men above will fire. Into the pen. Then they prove what they are in front of 4 witnesses. The herd may break against the rails. If you release him, he controls the next move. Gideon looked toward the rifle, line then at the narrow gate. His judgment moved behind his eyes, and Josephine saw the old debt take hold before he acted. He cut the tether from the saddle horn but left Danner's wrists looped in front. Mount and go alone. Josephine stepped toward him. No. Gideon did not turn. I will not start gunfire over a trapped herd. You are not ending danger. You are returning it to him. Danner caught the saddle horn and pulled himself upright. Gideon kept the main revolver. Ride out. Danner found one stirrup, his boot lifted. A tiny derringer slid into his bound hands. The shot went into the timber above the mares. The hidden rifleman answered with 2 rounds into the air. At the upper fence, the mounted accomplice kicked loose the barrier. Panic struck the herd before the sound finished crossing the basin. Horses surged uphill. Lark spun away from Josephine. Josephine rang the bell once, then again. Lark's head came around. For one heartbeat she fought the current of bodies, trying to turn toward the note. A larger gelding struck her shoulder and drove her with the herd. Lark, Josephine reached the lower rail as the rear horses wheeled across the pen. Gideon caught her around the waist and pulled her behind the fence before a gray mare crashed through the place where she had stood. He set Josephine on her feet and released her at once. Dust swallowed the upper gap. By the time it cleared, the meadow was empty. Danner and both accomplices had gone with the herd. The copper bell hung silent in Josephine's hand. Gideon started toward the upper trail. "No," her voice stopped him. "You have already chosen for me once." He turned back. Josephine crossed the churned ground toward a small tack shelter near the rocks. Feed sacks lay scattered inside. One had been dragged over an old coil of rope. The hemp was dark with age. The leather keeper bore 2 burned initials. G.C. Josephine lifted it. Gideon stopped outside the doorway. "Yours?" "It was." "When?" 7 years ago. "How did Danner get it?" Gideon did not answer. Josephine placed the rope on the ground between them. The bell remained closed in her fist. "You fought men for me," she said. "Then you let the one man who mattered ride away." Gideon did not reach for the rope. Josephine left it between them on the churned earth and waited for the answer he had postponed in the cabin, on the logging road, and in Bracken Pass. Dust still hung near the upper gap. Lark was gone. The bell remained in Josephine's fist, its clapper wrapped again in wool. "It began near Fort Union," Gideon said. 7 years ago." His voice carried no plea. "Danner and I handled remount horses for a cavalry detail. An army horse went down in a canyon and trapped my leg beneath the saddle. The patrol kept moving because shots were coming from the ridge. Danner came back." Josephine looked toward the trail where Danner had vanished. "He cut the girth?" "Yes. Dragged me free. Carried me out on his horse. And after that—" Gideon's gaze dropped to the initials burned into the leather keeper. 3 remounts disappeared the next year." "From your detail?" "Yes." "What did you see?" His jaw tightened once. "Danner near the night pen after midnight. He had no duty there." "Did you tell the sergeant?" "He questioned me." Gideon lifted his eyes. "I said I had seen nothing. The empty meadow seemed colder. Because he saved you. Because I decided one debt excused another lie." "Were the horses found?" "No." "Was Danner questioned again?" "He left before the inquiry went farther." Josephine looked at the old rope. "And this disappeared at the same time." "Close to it." "You never asked how he got it?" "I told myself camp gear vanished. Men borrowed things." Gideon's mouth flattened. That was easier than asking what else he had taken. The truth did not repair what had happened. It gave the damage a proper shape. Josephine touched the bell through her closed hand. "My father began writing complaints around those years. Remount horses with older brands buried beneath new strokes. Contractors moving stock through private camps. Men carrying papers that honest owners could not challenge fast enough." Gideon's attention sharpened. "Abram Mercer. You heard the name. In old inquiry talk. Not enough to know the truth. In 1880, stolen horses were found on Mercer land. My father said they had been planted there after he complained. No one cared that some scars had healed twice. Buyers had contracts. Men had standing. Abram had anger, bad debts, and no friends in the right offices." Josephine swallowed once. "They seized the herd. He died the next year with Rustler beside his name." Gideon stood very still. "My lie did not put those horses on his land. No." Josephine met his gaze. "It helped Danner remain the sort of man who could." The words struck cleanly. Gideon did not step away from them. "Yes. Your debt ended when he carried you out of that canyon. It should have. Everything after that was your choice." "Yes." No excuse. No demand that she notice how much the admission cost. Wind moved across the empty rails. Amos and Will waited near the horses, far enough away to leave the truth private, but close enough to know the search had failed. Gideon bent and lifted the rope. He coiled it over one arm. "I will take this to Sheriff Sloan. You should. And tell him all of it. You should have years ago." "I know." Smoke rose beyond the upper ridge. Will pointed. The shelter. A dark column thickened above the trees. Danner's men had doubled back after driving the herd out, or another man had waited behind. The tack shelter caught quickly. Dry boards folded into flame. The temporary pen would still stand, but the place where the rope had lain, the feed sacks, the small signs of use, all of it was being erased. Gideon watched the smoke. They expected us to chase. And leave the evidence behind, Josephine said. She took the rope from his arm long enough to wrap the burned keeper in cloth. This goes to Sloan before anyone decides it is only old camp gear. Hooves sounded on the lower trail. Amos raised his rifle, then lowered it when an iron pine rider came through the gap. The man's horse was dark with sweat along the neck. "Mrs. Kessler sent me," he said. He handed Josephine a folded note. Ruth's writing was spare and straight. A drover passing Bracken Pass had seen 3 separate strings being pushed south and east under Voss men. Buyers in Las Vegas had placed advances. Sale at first light, October 7th. 3 lots. 6 days. Josephine read the note twice. "Bell's Smithy lies southeast of Bracken Pass," Gideon said. "Farrow's camp farther on near Galinas Creek. You know them? Bell by reputation. Farrow by name. He drove contract stock. And the crescent punch? Bell used one on tools he made. Could another smith have copied it? Could have. Then we ask him." Gideon nodded. "I am going with you." "No." The answer stopped him. Amos and Will turned toward the horses, giving the road to them without pretending not to hear. Gideon kept his voice level. "You need riders. I need the truth where it costs you. I can give Sloan a statement and still catch up." "Then do that." Josephine folded Ruth's note and placed it inside her coat. "But you do not ride beside me because you say the right thing after choosing the wrong one." Gideon looked toward the burned shelter. "What do you need from me now?" "Go to Sloan. Give him the rope. Tell him about the remounts, the canyon, the Clive Danner, this meadow, and why you released him. And after belongs to what you do, not what you ask me to believe." They left the basin before the fire reached the outer rails. The descent took hours. Josephine rode ahead, Amos and Will behind her, Gideon last. The distance between them was deliberate. Her knee stiffened with every downhill turn, but she did not ask for help. At one steep wash, Gideon moved to the exposed side of the trail and said nothing. Protection without possession. It mattered. It did not close the wound. They reached Iron Pine after dark on September 30th. Ruth waited in the yard with a lantern. Josephine gave her the sale note. Gideon dismounted before anyone could ask why they had returned without the herd. "Danner escaped because I let him go," he said. Ruth's face hardened. "Why? He once saved my life. I let that decide what belonged to Josephine and what belonged to the law." Ruth looked toward Josephine. "Is that true?" "Yes." "And the rope?" Gideon held up the wrapped coil. "Mine. Missing since 1878. Found in Danner's shelter." Ruth did not soften. "Then choose the next thing with more sense." "I am going to Sloan. Tonight?" "Tonight." Josephine stood beside the tack room door. The running iron remained locked behind Ruth's left key and her own right key. "The box stays closed until morning," she said. "You and I open it together." Ruth nodded. Gideon turned his gelding toward Bracken Pass before the animal had cooled. He looked at Josephine once. "I won't ask you to wait." "Good." He rode south. Josephine watched until the dark took him, then carried the bell inside without ringing it. Sheriff Emmett Sloan was awake when Gideon reached Bracken Pass in the first hours of October 1st. The sheriff had taken 2 rooms behind Justice Hale's office while collecting complaints in that part of San Miguel County. One room held records and a narrow desk. The other held a cot, washstand, and 1 chair. Sloan opened the door in shirt sleeves, gray mustache flattened on one side from sleep. He saw the rope before he asked a question. "Whose?" "Mine. 7 years ago." Gideon placed it on Hale's spare desk, found today in a horse camp used by Clive Danner. Sloan turned the burned initials toward the lamp. "Start at the beginning." Gideon did. He named the remount detail near Fort Union, the fallen army horse, Danner's rescue, the 3 missing horses, and his false answer to the sergeant. He described Josephine's arrival, Danner's expired commission, the altered brands, the hidden meadow, Lark's response to the bell, and his own decision to cut Danner loose. Sloan interrupted only for dates, names, and places. "You saw Danner at the night pen in 1878? "Yes." "And denied it under questioning?" "Yes." "Why tell me now?" Gideon rested both hands on the desk. "Because Danner used my gratitude until other people paid for it. Yesterday I let him do it again. Sloane pushed paper, ink, and a pen across the desk. "Write it." The statement took 4 pages. Gideon signed each one. Sloane read them twice, then placed the rope beside the pages. "This may cost you your position. It may reopen the remount inquiry. I know. You may be called before a district court to explain the old lie. I know." Sloane wrote a receipt naming the voluntary statement and the surrendered rope. There was a remount clerk attached to some contractor disputes. Elias Gannett. He kept duplicate correspondence when men argued over payment. Gideon looked up. Abram Mercer's letters? Possibly. Maybe nothing but old account sheets. Sloane handed him the signed receipt. "I leave for Las Vegas before dawn tomorrow. You remain here today. I want a route sketch, every rider description, and the exact place you found that rope." Gideon folded the receipt into his coat. "Josephine may leave Iron Pine before I return. Then she leaves." Sloane gathered the statement into a file. "Truth does not become less necessary because it costs you time." Gideon sat down at the desk again. Outside, October 1st began cold and gray over Bracken Pass. At Iron Pine, Josephine was already preparing to unlock the strongbox without him. Before dawn on October 2nd, Ruth turned the left key while Josephine turned the right. The strongbox opened with a dull iron click. The running iron lay where they had placed it, wrapped in clean cloth beneath the tackroom shelves. Josephine unfolded the cloth and checked every mark. Narrow rod, flattened point, crescent punch near the neck, soot caught in the seam, grease dark along the grip. "Nothing moved, nothing altered. Still yours," Ruth said. Josephine wrapped it in canvas and slid it deep into the bedroll she had prepared for the pack horse. She tied the roll with 2 cross straps and pulled each knot tight enough that a man would need time and both hands to cut it free. The copper bell remained inside her satchel, muffled again. "Sloane rides south this morning," Ruth said. "Calder will come by the Remuda cutoff once the sheriff releases him. He may arrive after I leave. He will." Josephine tightened the dun mare's cinch. "Then he will know what it feels like." Ruth studied her but did not ask whether the words were anger or judgment. "Bell's smithy lies southeast of Bracken Pass. Take the lower road. It is slower but better for the knee." Josephine tested the left stirrup leather with both hands. The outer face looked dry but sound. "It will hold. For today, perhaps. Today is what I need." She rode out while the ranch roof still lay in darkness. The pack horse followed on a lead. 6 miles away, Bracken Pass was only beginning to wake when Josephine crossed the main road. No one stopped her. Justice Hale's office remained closed. One of Sloane's riders watered a horse outside the temporary rooms. But the sheriff himself was already gone on the direct road toward Las Vegas. Gideon was riding the opposite direction, north through the rough Remuda cutoff toward Iron Pine. They passed within miles of each other without knowing it. Josephine did not look back. At Iron Pine, Gideon arrived with Frost still clinging to the shaded fence. Ruth met him beside the stable. Sloane's signed receipt sat folded inside his coat. "She took the lower road," Ruth said, "through Bracken Pass before daylight." A stable hand came from the tack room holding a thin strip of leather. "Found this under the bench. Looks peeled from Miss Mercer's left stirrup strap." Gideon took it. The fragment had split from the inner side, where the damage would not show beneath the buckle. "How long ago?" "Couldn't say." Ruth's mouth tightened. She tested the outside. "So did I." Gideon crossed to the tack wall, chose a new stirrup leather, and punched 5 holes with an awl. Ruth watched where he placed the last one. "You remember the length?" "She rides the left one shorter, takes pressure off the knee." "Attention is not permission." Gideon tied the leather behind his saddle. "I know." He turned his horse back toward Bracken Pass, without taking food beyond what Ruth pushed into his hand. Josephine had already passed through town and continued south. The lower road bent between pinyon-covered rises, easier than the mountain cuts but still rough, where spring water had carved the shoulder away. 6 miles beyond Bracken Pass, the dun mare shortened one stride. Josephine felt the change through the saddle before she heard leather creak. She stopped beside a stand of pinyon and dismounted. The left stirrup strap had cracked halfway through from the inside. It had not broken yet. Josephine loosened the buckle, drew her knife, and began cutting away the damaged section. Hoofbeats came from the north. She moved beside the mare's shoulder and rested one hand near the saddle horn. Gideon appeared around the bend on a dark gelding. He stopped several yards away. "Ruth found the inner split after you left." Josephine looked at the replacement leather tied behind his saddle. "She sent you. She sent the strap." He dismounted. "I brought myself." He removed a folded paper from inside his coat and held it out. Josephine crossed the road and took it. Sheriff Emmett Sloan's handwriting stated that Gideon Calder had given a voluntary statement concerning Clive Danner, the missing remount horses, the hidden meadow, and his own false answer in 1878. It recorded the surrender of the GC rope and Sloan's intention to proceed directly to Las Vegas. Josephine read the page twice. "You stayed until he signed this, until I signed every page first, knowing I might leave." "Yes." He placed the new leather on a flat stone and stepped back. Josephine cut the damaged strap free herself. The replacement already held holes near the length she used. "You remembered the knee." She fitted the strap, mounted, and pressed weight into the left stirrup. It held without forcing the joint too low. "It will do." Gideon remained beside his horse. "Bell's smithy is one day southeast from here, if the pack horse keeps pace. Knowing the road does not mean you are coming." "No." Josephine folded Sloan's receipt and tucked it inside her coat. The paper mattered because Gideon had chosen the slower duty before the faster pursuit. He had put his confession where it could cost him. That did not erase the meadow. It changed what came next. "3 conditions," she said. "Name them. I lead the horse identification work. You do not decide what a scar proves because you believe speed matters more." "Agreed." "You do not attack Danner before the horses and witnesses are secure." Gideon's jaw tightened, but his answer did not. "Agreed." Josephine touched the satchel at her hip. "If I ring this bell, you open the route I choose. You do not pull me toward another gate because you think yours is safer." He held her gaze. "Even if I believe you are wrong?" "Especially then." Wind pushed dust across the road between them. "You choose the gate," he said. "I open it. No correction afterward." "None." Josephine gathered the reins. "Then you may ride with me." Gideon mounted and fell in behind her. He did not move abreast unless the road narrowed or the pack-horse stumbled. He watched the bedroll carrying the iron. He did not ask to inspect the knots. Near sunset, Josephine chose a camp above a narrow wash where the horses could drink, and no fire would show from the road. Gideon placed his bedroll across the small fire from hers. After they ate, Josephine checked the straps around the canvas-wrapped iron, then looked toward the darkening trail. "Take first watch." "The pack horse?" "The road." Gideon nodded. "The road." Josephine lay down with her coat beneath her head. The copper bell rested near her hand. She woke once during the night. Gideon sat beyond the firelight, with the rifle across his knees, facing south. He had not shifted closer. She closed her eyes again. At sunrise on October 3rd, they reached Orrin Bell's smithy. The place looked abandoned from the road. Weeds crowded a collapsed lean-to. Rusted shoes hung beneath the eaves. No smoke rose from the low stone chimney. Gideon dismounted but stayed beside the horses. "Your witness," he said. "Your questions." Josephine carried the wrapped iron to the door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Wood scraped across the floor inside. The door opened 3 inches, and a shotgun barrel appeared through the gap. Orrin Bell was small beneath a heavy work shirt, his beard white, one eye clouded with age. His gaze passed over Josephine, stopped on Gideon, then dropped to the canvas in her hands. "I am Josephine Mercer," she said. "I need you to identify a tool." Bell started closing the door. Josephine exposed only the neck of the iron. The crescent punch caught the morning light. Bell stopped. Fear reached his face before denial did. "Where did you get that?" "From Clive Danner's branding fire." The shotgun lowered an inch. "I don't know Danner. Then another smith used your mark." Bell stared at the crescent. "No. Will you touch it?" "I don't need to." Gideon remained behind Josephine, offering no answer for her. Bell opened the door wider but did not invite them inside. "I made that point for Danner," he said. "He claimed it was for correcting his own stock." Josephine turned the flattened tip toward him. "You knew this shape was not made for honest correction." Bell's mouth pulled tight. "I knew after I filed it." "Why did you stay silent?" His cloudy eye shifted toward the empty road. Roland Voss came 3 days later, left money on my bench and said a smith who forged crooked tools might hang beside the man using them. Will you say that before Sheriff Sloane? Bell gripped the shotgun harder. The iron won't be enough. Who will? Bell looked toward the dark shop behind him, then back at Josephine. Ned Farrow. He drove the 3 sail strings. He knows which lot holds your mare. Bell's answer left them only one road. By mid-morning on October 4th, Josephine had rewrapped the running iron and tied it deep inside the bedroll on the pack horse. The copper bell stayed muffled in her satchel. Orrin Bell barred his smithy from the outside, saddled an old brown mare, and joined them without pretending courage had come easily. Farrow's camp lies near Galinas Creek, he said. 12 miles if he hasn't moved. Will he speak? Josephine asked. Bell settled the shotgun across his saddle. He talks when fear loosens his tongue and lies when fear closes it again. Gideon rode on Josephine's left, far enough not to crowd her injured knee. Which fear owns him now? Voss. Bell glanced toward the road behind them. Ned's brother hauls freight. Voss promised to close every yard against the family if Ned named the sail routes. Josephine touched the bedroll straps once before mounting. Then we reach him before Voss gives him a worse reason to stay silent. They found the sheep camp beneath a pale bluff where the creek curved through cottonwoods. A wagon leaned near the bank. Sheep covered the lower slope in a moving gray sheet while 2 dogs held the edges. Ned Farrow sat beside a cook fire with a tin plate balanced on one knee. He saw Bell first, then Gideon. The plate fell into the dirt. Farrow ran for a saddled horse tied behind the wagon. Josephine turned the dun mare across his path without drawing a weapon. Farrow stopped 3 strides from her stirrup. Running tells Voss where you stand, she said. Standing here tells Danner. He already knows you drove the strings. Farrow's eyes moved toward the pack horse. You brought the iron. Josephine did not answer. His fear had already answered for him. How many strings? She asked. I didn't steal them. How many? Farrow looked at Bell. Bell dismounted slowly. I told them what I made. Farrow's face emptied. Then you're a dead man. Maybe, Bell said, but not a silent one. Josephine exposed only the flattened tip of the iron. Farrow recoiled before he could hide recognition. Did Danner use this on horses you moved? Put it away. Did he? Farrow wiped both hands on his trousers. Yes. Josephine covered the tool again and returned it to the bedroll. Tell Sheriff Sloane, Voss will ruin my brother. He may try. That's all you've got? Farrow laughed once, bitter and sharp. No promise? I cannot promise your brother keeps every freight contract. I cannot promise you escape every consequence. I will not buy your truth with a lie. Gideon removed Sloane's signed receipt from his coat. I stayed silent once because Danner saved my life. Men paid for it who never knew my name. Farrow stared at the paper. In writing. To Sloane, every page. Farrow read the sheriff's signature twice. His shoulders lowered, but the fear remained. 3 lots, he said. Lot 1 is freight geldings. Lot 2 is mares and breeding stock. Lot 3 is rough animals and anything buyers might question. Josephine kept the reins still. Lark, bay lead mare. White hook under the jaw? Yes, Lot 2. Danner keeps her with the mares because they settle around her. The answer struck hard enough that Josephine's hand tightened on the saddle horn. She did not let Farrow see more than that. Sale time, first light October 7th. Loading begins when the buyers sign. What happens to the horses whose scars are too plain? They move before inspection. Where? Farrow shook his head. Danner never said. Gideon's voice stayed level. Who gives the yard orders? Voss speaks to Pratt. Pratt runs the loading hands. Danner controls the rear pens. Why the rush? Josephine asked. Buyers' advances. Freight credit. Voss used the next sale to secure both. If the shipment stalls, men start asking which horses stand behind the money. Josephine drew paper from her satchel and placed it on the wagon bed. Write the lot numbers, Pratt's name, Lark's pen, the sale hour, and what Voss said about moving scarred stock. Farrow did not reach for the pen. A written statement can hang me beside them. It can reach Sloane if we do not. Farrow stared toward the empty road beyond the bluff. Then he sat and wrote. His hand shook over the first line and steadied before the last. He signed his name beneath it. A camp rider named Luis Ortega watched from the flock edge. Farrow called him over and offered $2 to carry the paper to Sloan in Las Vegas. Luis folded the statement inside his vest. "Take the lower road," Gideon said. "Do not stop in Bracken Pass." Luis mounted a fresh chestnut and rode south. The first rifle shot struck the wagon wheel before his dust settled. Sheep broke across the slope. One dog barked toward the bluff. A second shot tore through the wagon canvas. Gideon pulled Bell behind the wheel. 3 riders above, 2 near the creek. Farrow froze beside the fire. Josephine caught his sleeve. "Where are the camp horses?" "Behind the bluff. Picket line between the cottonwoods." "How many?" 8. She ran. The horses were already plunging against the rope. Josephine cut the downstream end free, then snapped the loose line against the nearest gelding's flank. "Drive them toward the creek," she called. "Keep them off the road." Gideon did not ask why. He ran wide, swinging his coat to bend the horses across the attacker's path. 8 frightened animals surged around the bluff. 2 mounted men pulled hard to avoid them. A third horse spun away from the creek bank. Farrow dragged Bell toward the brown mare. Another shot cracked. Bell stumbled and clutched his upper shoulder. Blood spread through the shirt in a narrow line. "Graze," he said through his teeth. "Get me mounted." Josephine braced the mare, while Farrow pushed Bell into the saddle. Gideon gathered the loose camp horses and turned them into a moving screen between the witnesses and the ridge. Danner appeared on the road above them. He leaned from his saddle as Josephine passed and caught the outer saddlebag behind her cantle. The strap tore free. Danner wheeled away with the bag before Gideon could close the distance. Gideon turned after him. "No!" Josephine shouted. "Witnesses first." His gelding checked so sharply dirt sprayed from the hooves. Danner disappeared over the ridge carrying dried meat, a spare shirt, and 2 empty cloths. The running iron remained tied inside the bedroll on the pack horse. The copper bell remained in Josephine's satchel. Gideon rode back to Bell, pressed folded cloth against the old man's shoulder, and took the slower position beside him. He had let Danner escape because Josephine chose the witnesses. This time he had not mistaken pursuit for protection. They rode until dark, rested the horses near water, and tightened Bell's bandage. Farrow watched every ridge but did not turn back. At first light on October 5th they continued south. Bell remained upright through stubbornness and a secure wrap. Gideon did not push the pace beyond what the injured man and pack horse could hold. Josephine rode ahead enough to choose the ground, not enough to leave the others exposed. By evening, rail smoke lay across Las Vegas beneath the final rise. The stockyards spread over the eastern flats in a maze of pens, loading chutes, freight sheds, and tall lantern poles. Josephine searched the corrals until a bay mare raised her head above the rail of Lot 2, white hook beneath the jaw, thin neck, old wire scar across the left shoulder. Lark was alive. 1 full day remained before the sale. By the time darkness settled over Las Vegas on October 5th, Josephine had reduced the stockyard to 3 places she could not afford to lose. Lot 2 held Lark and the breeding mares. The rear pens held the animals whose scars Voss most needed hidden. The eastern gate opened onto level ground beyond the rail line, with no loading chute, wagon wall, or narrow lane to trap a frightened herd. Everything else was noise. Sheriff Emmett Sloan met them behind a feed warehouse west of the yards. Farrow's signed statement lay open on a crate, delivered by Luis Ortega before sunset. Bell sat nearby with his injured shoulder bound beneath a clean strip of cloth. Farrow stood close to the door and watched the alley between every sentence. "Pratt runs the loading hands," Sloan said. "Danner controls the rear pens. Voss has buyer's advances tied to tomorrow's sale. That gives him reason to rush," Josephine said. "Not proof of theft. The horses supply the proof," Gideon replied. Josephine drew 3 marks in the dirt with the heel of her boot. Lot 2, rear pens, eastern gate. Sloan looked down at the rough map. "And the iron? Still mine." The running iron remained wrapped in canvas inside the bedroll on the pack horse. Josephine carried it to a small storeroom adjoining the warehouse. The room had 1 door, no window wide enough for a man to enter, and a heavy lock fixed through an iron staple. She placed the bedroll on a shelf tied exactly as it had been since Iron Pine, then locked the door herself. The key went beneath her dress, beside the strongbox key she no longer needed. Sloan stationed a deputy in the corridor outside. "No one enters without Miss Mercer," he said, "not even me." Josephine tested the lock once. It held. The copper bell remained in her satchel. "Gannett?" Gideon asked. Sloan's expression tightened. "Found him. Elias Gannett remembers Abram Mercer and remembers disputed remount accounts. He says old correspondence may be in a rusted trunk beneath 30 years of account books." "Maybe," Josephine asked. "He has not opened it. Then we do not build tomorrow on letters that may have become mouse bedding." Sloan gave a short nod. "That is why I wanted you here." Bell leaned forward despite the pull in his shoulder. "If Danner knows Pharaoh spoke, he'll move the worst horses tonight." "He knows he took the wrong bag," Pharaoh said. "He knows the iron is still out there." Gideon studied the warehouse wall as if seeing the stockyard beyond it. "Then tomorrow is not only a sale. It is the last hour he can separate the horses from the witnesses." Josephine touched the muffled bell through the satchel. "Which is why the eastern gate matters." Gideon met her eyes. "I hold it when you tell me, when I ring, when you ring." No one added a second plan over hers. Before sunrise on October 6th, Gideon entered the stockyard through the service gate as Iron Pine's remuda foreman. Ruth's written authority named Josephine as the handler permitted to inspect disputed Voss stock, and she carried it through the buyer's entrance folded inside her coat. Pratt met them beside the central lane. He was broad-necked, square-faced, and already angry enough to speak before asking a question. "Iron Pine stopped payment." "Iron Pine stopped payment on disputed horses," Gideon said. "Mrs. Kessler sent us to inspect the stock before another dollar moves." Pratt glanced toward Josephine. "She the Mercer woman? She is the one who found altered brands in your last shipment." Gideon's tone held no insult. That made the answer harder to challenge. Josephine went first to Lot 2. Lark stood near the center, thinner than she had been in the mountain meadow, but still holding the mares around her in a loose circle. One ear turned toward Josephine's steps. Josephine did not call. Not yet. She moved along the fence and examined what the rails allowed her to see. A sorrel mare carried hair growing backward over one dark line. A roan wore mud packed thick across the hip despite 3 clear days. Near the far rail, 3 animals with the deepest scars were being pushed toward the rear pens. "Why move those?" Josephine asked a yard hand. The man shrugged. "Pratt's order, before buyers inspect, says they're not part of the offering." Josephine watched them disappear behind the service shed. Dry hay stood stacked along the outer wall. A square kerosene can rested on a shelf beneath the roof overhang. The arrangement could have been ordinary. In Danner's hands, nothing ordinary stayed harmless. She crossed to the eastern side. The gate was wide enough for 2 horses abreast and opened toward an open field beyond the rail line. Its lower hinge sat buried in packed dirt. Gideon arrived behind her. "This one?" he asked. "This one." He lifted the bar, tested the swing, then scraped soil away from the lower hinge with his boot. The gate moved farther but still dragged near the end. He called 1 yard hand over and had him clear the last hard ridge beneath it. "Which side?" Gideon asked. Josephine pointed outside the swing. "There. If the herd presses against the panel, you need room to pull instead of being pinned behind it." Gideon stepped to the place she indicated and tested his footing. "Here, yes." He set his hat over the top rail with the brim facing inward, a marker visible through dust and smoke. Josephine noticed. He did not explain it. Roland Voss entered the yard after sunrise in a dark coat and polished boots. Buyers followed him from pen to pen, listening to his assurances about age, condition, and delivery. When he reached Lot 2, his gaze found Josephine before it found Lark. "Miss Mercer," he said, "you have become expensive." Josephine pointed to the sorrel mare near the rail. "That horse carries 2 healing ages in 1 brand." Voss turned to the buyers. "This woman stole a tool from my employee and assaulted a lawful agent. Her father made similar accusations before stolen horses appeared on Mercer land. The old shame came exactly where he intended." Josephine did not defend Abram with grief. "Permit an open inspection before Sheriff Sloan and any buyer willing to put his observations in writing." One freight buyer stepped closer to the sorrel. "I will not pay the balance before inspection." Another man closed the leather folder in his hands. Voss's ease tightened at the mouth. "Pratt," he called. Lot 1 loads at first light. Lot 2 follows. Rear stock moves before buyers enter. Pratt hesitated. Some men already asked about the scars. Then move faster. The order was not a confession. It was pressure made visible. Sloan spent the afternoon collecting written descriptions from 2 local claimants before either man entered the yard. The first described a mare with a white patch beneath the left hind fetlock and a rope scar hidden under the mane. The second described a gelding with a broken circle brand and a pale crack in the left hind hoof. Sloan sealed both statements. No claimant would shape memory after seeing an animal. Josephine returned to Lot 2 before dusk. Lark had moved closer to the eastern rail. Gideon stood near the chosen gate, one hand resting on the bar. Danner appeared from the freight sheds with dust on his coat and anger held too tight beneath the skin. He saw Gideon, then the hat over the rail, then Josephine near Lark. "You should have stayed in the mountains," he said. Gideon did not leave the gate. "You should have kept riding." Danner came close enough that the rail separated them by less than an arm's length. "Sloan has your confession." "He does. Truth from a man who lied once is cheap." Gideon's right hand rested inches from Danner's wrist. He could have taken him before the next breath. Danner saw the opening and smiled. "Lost your nerve?" "No." Gideon glanced toward Josephine. "I was told which gate to hold." The smile vanished. Gideon stepped back into position. "Go do what Voss sent you to do." Danner walked away, but not toward the loading chutes. He passed behind the warehouse and saw Bell through the curtained window. Farrow moved behind him. A deputy stood in the corridor outside the locked storeroom. The bag Danner had stolen held no iron. The smith lived, the drover lived. Sloan had written statements. Buyers were withholding money. Claimants had described horses before seeing them. By sunrise, the scars would speak in front of men. Voss could not easily silence. Danner disappeared toward the rear pens. Night came. Loading hands slept in blankets near the chutes. Pratt posted 2 men at Lot 1 and another near the mares. Sloan kept his deputy outside the storeroom. Josephine rested for less than an hour on a feed sack with the bell beneath her coat. Gideon remained at the eastern gate. The yard cooled until every metal latch held the cold. Pre-dawn on October 7th arrived without color. Horses shifted before the men did, sensing movement in the rear lanes. Josephine rose when a sharp smell reached her through the dust. Kerosene. Danner came from behind the service shed, carrying the square can beneath a folded horse blanket. Pratt saw him and stopped. "What are you doing?" Danner tipped the can along the rear fence. Dark liquid soaked hay, dirt, and the base of the rails. Lark lifted her head in Lot 2. Gideon's hat still marked the eastern gate. Josephine pulled the wool from the bell's clapper. "Open the corridor," she said. Danner struck the match against the post. Flame opened in his hand. The match fell into the kerosene-soaked hay, and fire ran beneath the rear fence in a yellow line. Horses in the back pen struck the rails before the first smoke rose. One reared against the boards. Another kicked through a lower plank as Danner tore open the rear latches. "Move them," he shouted, turning panic into another hired hand. Josephine ran toward Lot 2. Men near the loading chutes scattered from the smoke. Pratt stood beside the mares with a whip in one hand, staring at the fire and the horses pressing shoulder to shoulder. "Open the eastern corridor," Josephine called. Blankets along both sides. No whips. Pratt did not move. She took the whip from him and threw it beneath the fence. "Do it, or this yard becomes a grave." The order reached him. He shouted for the hands. 2 men tore blankets from the tack rail. Another ran toward the eastern passage. Behind them, rough stock burst from the rear pens and crowded the center lanes. Josephine slipped through the narrow handling gap into Lot 2. Lark stood near the middle with her neck high and her eyes bright from smoke. The mares around her turned when she turned, each animal seeking the decision of the one horse that still held herself steady. Josephine did not grab for the halter. She moved to Lark's left shoulder and spoke close enough for the mare to hear beneath the pounding hooves and breaking rails. "I am here." One ear turned toward her. "Enough." Josephine tore the wool from the copper bell's clapper and fastened the cracked rawhide strap beneath Lark's jaw. The old leather held, though a split widened near the buckle. Fire climbed the rear boards, smoke lowered across the pens. Josephine lifted the bell and rang once. Its note cut through the yard. Lark stopped fighting the pressure around her. Her breath came hard, but she lowered her head enough to see the passage Josephine chose. "Come with me." Josephine stepped toward the corridor, staying beside Lark's shoulder. The mare followed one pace, then another. A chestnut turned behind her. Two younger mares crowded after that one. Yard hands raised blankets along the passage, narrowing confusion into a route without striking a single horse. At the eastern fence, Gideon saw the bell move. He did not run toward Josephine. He turned to the gate she had chosen. The bar came free. The lower hinge dragged through packed earth and stopped the panel halfway. Gideon braced one boot against the post and pulled. "Clear the hinge." A yard hand kicked at the hard ridge beneath it. Gideon drove his shoulder into the gate. The panel groaned wider toward the open field. No chute beyond it. No wagon wall. No narrow corner where frightened animals could pile upon one another. Josephine rang the bell again. Lark entered the corridor. The cracked strap stretched beneath her jaw. The mares followed close enough for their shoulders to brush the blankets. Danner saw the movement from the rear pens. "Close that gate!" He drew his revolver and ran toward Gideon. Gideon kept one hand on the panel. "Hold the blankets," he told the nearest man. Danner fired. The shot struck the upper rail and sent splinters across Gideon's cheek. He stayed at the gate. Josephine and the main body of mares were still inside. A roan slammed sideways near the hinge. Gideon caught the halter, turned the horse's head toward open ground and released it. The animal kicked as it broke free. One hoof struck Gideon's right shoulder and drove him against the post. Pain emptied the color from his face. He rose again. Josephine crossed the threshold beside Lark. 10 horses passed, then 20. The rough stock joined behind the mares, no longer rushing in every direction, because movement had acquired a leader and an open end. Hooves struck level earth instead of boards. The herd widened into the field, slowing as space returned around them. Only when Josephine and the last crowded horses cleared did Gideon release the gatepost. Danner reached him with the revolver raised. Gideon knocked the barrel aside. The shot struck dirt. They hit the fence together. A broken rail opened Gideon's forearm through his sleeve, but he trapped Danner's gun wrist, turned it against the post, and forced the weapon loose. Danner drove a shoulder into Gideon's ribs. Gideon held. The old debt did not stop his hands this time. He took Danner to the ground and bound both wrists behind him with a lead rope. Alive, unable to hide behind the one brave thing he had done 7 years earlier. Sheriff Sloan and his deputy entered through the western lane as the last horses cleared Lot 2. Farrow ran beside them and closed the south service gate. Voss had mounted a dark sorrel from the freight pens. He drove the horse toward the opening, but the deputy reached the lane first and leveled his revolver. "Rein in." Voss pulled left. Farrow stepped into the side passage. "That gelding came through the north string," he called. Pratt entered him under the freight lot. Smoke blocked the western yard. The eastern field held loose horses. Voss had nowhere clean to ride. He dismounted and lifted one hand. "This is Danner's doing. I ordered no fire." Sloan took the reins. "Then you can explain the stock." Men formed a bucket line from the trough. Flames consumed the rear hay and part of the service shed, but the main pens held. Josephine stayed in the eastern field until Lark and the rescued horses settled into a loose circle. Only then did she remove the copper bell before the cracked strap failed. Lark breathed against her shoulder. Josephine pressed one palm to the old wire scar, then returned to the yard with the bell in her hand. Sloan's deputy met her outside the warehouse. "The storeroom is as you left it." He walked beside her but did not reach for the key. Josephine drew it from beneath her dress, opened the heavy lock, and entered alone far enough to take the bedroll from the shelf. The cross straps remained tied. No cut marks, no disturbed knots. She carried it into the yard and set it on a crate before Bell, Farrow, Pratt, 2 buyers, and the local claimants whose written descriptions had been sealed the day before. Josephine untied the straps and opened the canvas. The running iron lay inside, soot still caught near the flattened point, the crescent punch visible beneath the morning light. "The tool remains yours until you release it," Sloan said. Josephine lifted it where Bell could see without touching. Your work. Bell bent close, his injured shoulder held against his body. Mine. I filed that point for Clive Danner. He said it was for correcting his own stock. His clouded eye moved toward Voss. 3 days later, Roland Voss left money on my bench and said a smith who made crooked tools might hang beside the man using them. Liar, Voss said. Bell's mouth tightened. For years. Not today. Pharaoh stepped forward. He named the mountain routes, the 3 sail strings, Lark's use as the lead mare in Lot 2, and Pratt's place over the loading hands. Voss ordered the worst-marked horses moved before buyers entered, he said. Danner controlled the rear pens. Sloan faced Pratt. What orders reached you? Pratt wiped soot from his mouth with the back of one hand. Move the scarred horses before first light. Load the freight stock, then the mares. Danner handled the rear animals. Did Voss order the fire? Pratt shook his head. Not where I heard. Sloan accepted the limit. Then we hold to what can be proved. He opened the sealed claimant descriptions. The first named a mare with a white patch beneath the left hind fetlock and a rope scar hidden under the mane. Josephine found both marks on a sorrel from the rear pens. The second described a gelding with a broken circle brand and a pale crack in the left hind hoof. That animal stood among the freight stock. Only after the statements were read did the claimants approach. Neither man had shaped memory after seeing the horses. Josephine chose one mare, carrying a dark added stroke across an older scar. Before Sloan and the witnesses, she washed the mark and clipped the hair close. The newer burn rose thick over older tissue. She held the running iron near the scar without touching the animal. The flattened tip matched the added line in width and angle. This does not prove the whole operation by itself, Josephine said. It joins the tool to the method. The horses, routes, witnesses, orders, and sale records must carry the rest. She turned the iron toward Sloan. Enter it. He received it with both hands. The deputy wrote Josephine's name, the time, Bell's identification, and every witness present before carrying the iron inside. Another deputy removed Danner's expired commission and recorded it beside the seized revolvers. Sloan held Danner on evidence of arson, assault, horse theft, obstruction, and using false authority to frighten witnesses. He held Voss on evidence of receiving and offering stolen horses, conspiring to conceal their marks, threatening witnesses, and attempting to flee. He did not accuse Voss of ordering the fire without proof. 2 owners surged toward him anyway. One struck Voss before the deputy intervened. The other raised a fist. Josephine stepped between them. No, the man breathed hard. He stole from us. Then let the truth hold him, she said. Do not give him another hidden act to use. The fist lowered. Gideon stood beside the eastern gate, with blood darkening his sleeve and his right shoulder hanging low. Before Sloan led the prisoners away, Gideon spoke. There is another statement. He kept it short. In 1878, I saw Danner near 3 remount horses that disappeared. I told the sergeant I had seen nothing. I lied because Danner had saved my life. I will answer for it. Voss laughed through a split lip. You think that makes you clean? No, Gideon said. It makes the lie mine instead of theirs. Sloan led Voss and Danner toward the county rooms. Beyond the eastern fence, rescued horses stood shaken but alive. Lark waited at their front. Gideon remained beside the open gate. Josephine stopped near him, the copper bell warm in her palm. Did I hold the right gate? He asked. You did. Sloan paused near the lane. The horses may prove the present thefts. Abram Mercer's record is another matter. Gannett is still searching, and a territorial district judge will have to review the old seizure. Josephine looked toward Lark in the first gray light of morning. The herd was safe. Her father's name was not. 4 days after the stockyard fire, Abram Mercer's name remained where the law had left it. The horses were alive. Danner and Voss were under guard. The running iron had entered Sheriff Sloan's custody, with witnesses beside it. None of that had yet changed the old county entry that called Josephine's father a rustler. On October 8th, Gideon sat outside a Las Vegas doctor's room with his right arm held close to his body and his forearm wrapped from wrist to elbow. The rail had cut shallow but long. The kick to his shoulder had left dark bruising without breaking bone. Bell occupied the chair beside him, his grazed shoulder newly bandaged beneath a clean shirt. A man could get shot cheaper, Bell muttered when the doctor named his fee. "Do not test that," Josephine said. Gideon's mouth moved at one corner, but he did not pretend laughter did not hurt. Sheriff Sloan waited in his county room with a fresh notice drying beside the inkstand. It stated that San Miguel County had issued no warrant for Josephine Mercer, that Roland Voss's broadside had been private paper, and that Josephine was a material witness in an inquiry involving stolen horses, altered brands, threats, assault, and the stockyard fire. "I cannot gather every copy Voss posted," Sloan said. "I can prevent an honest man from mistaking his money for county authority." Josephine read the notice once. "Where will you place it? The livery?" "Hale's office, the general store. Anywhere the reward was treated like law." Before noon, Sloan nailed the first copy to the same livery wall where Voss's notice had hung. The storekeeper pulled down a torn strip of the old broadside from his window and swept the scraps into the street. No crowd cheered. A freight driver paused long enough to read both notices, removed his hat, and continued toward the yard. That was enough. The 6 Mercer mares, Lark among them, remained in guarded pasture outside Las Vegas, while descriptions, brand records, and old ownership papers were compared. Josephine could visit, but she could not take them. Not yet. The gray gelding had never left Iron Pine after the Bracken Pass inspection. A rider brought word that Justice Hale, Martha Redd's sworn description, the farrier's account, and Ruth's custody record had agreed. Sloan sent written direction releasing the horse. Martha led him home herself. Before she reached the road, the gelding searched both of her coat pockets for sugar. Josephine smiled when she heard. Then Elias Gannett arrived carrying a narrow wooden box beneath one arm. He was stooped, white-haired, and dressed in a clerk's coat worn smooth at the elbows. Account sheets filled the box in bundles tied with fading string. Gannett separated 2 letters and placed them beneath the window. Abram Mercer's handwriting crossed the pages in firm, crowded strokes. Josephine knew the hand before she read a word. The first letter warned that remount horses were appearing along contractor roads with older brands buried beneath fresh burns. Abram named routes, dates, and 3 animals he believed had been altered before sale. The second letter reported Clive Danner near a disputed remount string before horses disappeared. It asked that the complaint be copied outside the contractor office because prior correspondence had gone unanswered. Neither letter proved who had placed stolen stock on Mercer land in 1880. Neither erased the seizure. They did something quieter and harder to dismiss. They proved Abram had described the method before men used the result to ruin him. Josephine touched one folded edge where her father's thumb had darkened the paper years ago. "When did you receive these?" Sloan asked. Gannett named the months and the remount office where he had copied them. He explained why he kept duplicates when contractors disputed payments. Sloan wrote every answer. "What happens now?" Josephine asked. "Gannett gives a sworn statement," Sloan said. "These letters go with your evidence, Calder's statement, Bell's identification, Farrow's routes, Pratt's account, and the surviving horses. A territorial district judge reviews the old seizure. If the record rested on false testimony or corrupted brands, the judge can direct the county clerk to place a correction beside it, not erase it." "No." Josephine looked down at Abram's writing. "Good. Erasing it would let men pretend no one did this." Ruth Kessler reached Las Vegas on October 10th in an Iron Pine wagon with the disputed stock ledger wrapped beneath the seat. She had left an acting foreman at the ranch and spent 2 days on the road because books could show dates but could not answer questions. Her ledger recorded Voss's delivery, the unpaid half of the price, the separation of the 12 horses, the gray gelding's condition, and every written direction received from Hale. Sloan took the entries one by one. Ruth corrected him once when he named the wrong afternoon. He thanked her and changed the line. That evening Josephine stood at the guarded pasture fence. Lark came forward but stopped beyond reach, as if months of forced movement had taught her to distrust every opening. Josephine did not climb the rail. She held the copper bell in one hand without ringing it. "You do not have to come because I am here," she said. Lark's ears moved toward her voice. After a while, the mare crossed the last few feet and rested her muzzle against the top board. Josephine touched the white hook beneath her jaw. Soon, she said. It was not a promise of what the law had not yet given. On October 11th, Ruth, Josephine, and Gideon began the return to Iron Pine. Gideon rode beside the wagon, where the road was level, and walked his horse down the roughest grades to spare his shoulder. They camped near water, rather than force the final miles after dark. Josephine saw him struggle to remove the saddle with one useful arm. She waited. When he asked, she lifted the rear of it while he freed the cinch. No gratitude was demanded from either side. Frost silvered the shaded grass when they reached Iron Pine on October 12th. The disputed Voss horses remained separated. The Gray's empty pen stood open after Martha's lawful release. Ruth carried her ledger inside, then returned to the remuda gate while Josephine watched a pair of young mares circle the water trough. "I need a supervisor through winter," Ruth said. "Wages, a room, authority over the breeding stock, and every hand assigned to it." Once, Josephine might have accepted before the offer could vanish. Now she measured it against a future she could name. "There is a high pasture north of Bracken Pass. My father leased it before the herd was seized. Spring water, timber to the west, and fence that needs more work than prayer." "Mercer High Meadow," Ruth said. "The owner died. His nephew has tried to lease it for 2 years. You know him? Enough to arrange an introduction. I am not asking you to buy it." I did not offer. Josephine looked toward the northern ridge. 6 mares would not restore everything Abram lost. They could begin something that belonged to her. "I will supervise through winter for wages. By spring, I want Mercer High Meadow leased in my name." Agreed. "The mares remain mine. They were never mine to claim." Gideon had listened from beside the fence without entering the bargain. Ruth went toward the house, leaving him and Josephine above the creek, where one road bent toward the line camps and the other toward Bracken Pass. His forearm bandage showed beneath his sleeve. The right shoulder remained low. "I owe you an apology that asks for nothing," he said. Josephine waited. "Danner saved my life. I let gratitude become silence. Then I let that silence choose for you in the meadow. I was wrong both times. I will not spend my life easing your guilt. I know, and I do not need you paying me back. I know that too." Gideon rested his good hand on the saddle horn. "I want to court you because I choose you, not because I owe you. I will finish my work here. I will not ask for a share of your mares or your lease. In spring, if you permit it, I will ask what future you want." Josephine studied the man who had once mistaken debt for duty and later stood at the gate she chose while fire moved behind him. Trust had not returned in one moment. It had come back in separate acts, each one small enough to refuse. "You may court me," she said, his shoulders eased by a fraction. "And spring gets its own answer." She guided her mare closer, set one hand against the uninjured side of his coat, and paused long enough for him to understand that the next choice was hers. Then she kissed him, brief, certain. Gideon did not follow when she drew back. That night, Josephine hung the copper bell beside the door of her boarding room. She removed the wool from the clapper and closed the door behind her. The bell sounded once, clear and unhidden. Before dawn, a rider from Las Vegas reached Iron Pine with Sloane's folded message. The 6 Mercer mares had passed the first review. Lark was among them. Full release still required the district proceeding, but the law had stopped calling Josephine a thief. By the second week of May, the 6 Mercer mares stood below Bracken Pass with lawful release papers folded inside Josephine's coat and spring grass under their feet. Lark waited at the front, her bay coat dark in the morning sun, the white hook beneath her jaw as clear as ever. 7 months had passed since the stockyard fire, long enough for snow to close the mountain roads, long enough for witnesses to repeat the same facts under oath until fear could no longer bend them. Principal judgments had been entered before spring. Clive Danner answered for the stockyard fire, assault, horse theft, and the false authority he had used to frighten witnesses and force horses through private hands. The court did not care that he had once carried Gideon from a canyon beneath rifle fire. One brave act had not purchased every choice that followed. Roland Voss answered for receiving and offering stolen horses, concealing altered brands, threatening witnesses, and using false transactions to keep buyers' money moving. No judgment claimed he had ordered the fire. No proof had shown it. What the evidence established was enough. His freight contracts were gone. Property tied to the operation had been placed under restitution claims. Some families recovered horses. Others received partial payment. Several claims remained open because justice moved slower than loss and did not always fill the place it found empty. Abram Mercer's matter took its own road. The territorial district judge reviewed Elias Gannett's copied letters, Gideon's sworn admission, Orrin Bell's identification of the running iron, Ned Farrow's roots, Pratt's account of the loading orders, and the scars carried by the surviving horses. The judge directed the San Miguel County clerk to place a correction beside the old Mercer seizure entry. The original record remained. Beside it now stood the finding that Abram Mercer had reported the altered brand method before stolen horses were found on his land, and had been wrongfully implicated in the matter that destroyed his name. Josephine received a certified copy wrapped in oilcloth. She read it once outside the clerk's office. Then she placed it in a small iron box beside the lease to Mercer High Meadow. Both papers bore her name. Through winter, Josephine worked for wages at Iron Pine. She supervised the breeding stock, taught the assigned hands to read pressure before applying more of it, and refused to let speed become an excuse for roughness. One young gelding stopped striking the rails after the men learned to leave him one good direction to move. A mare that had fought every rope began standing for inspection when Josephine changed the order of approach. The work did not restore the Mercer herd. It proved what Josephine could build without waiting for anyone to return the past intact. Gideon completed every obligation he owed Ruth Kessler. He brought the North Remuda down before the deepest snow, repaired the line camp roof, trained the man who would replace him as foreman, and kept the disputed Voss horses under guard until written orders released them. The cut on his forearm healed to a pale scar. His right shoulder regained its strength by March. When Ruth paid his final wages, he bought fencing wire, hinges, a new auger, and enough provisions for spring work. He did not buy a share of Josephine's lease. He did not ask for one. Early in May, after rain softened the ground along the southern boundary of Mercer High Meadow, Gideon met Josephine beside two unfinished fence posts. No audience waited. No horse stood between them. "May I ask now?" he said. Josephine knew which question he meant. "You may." Gideon removed his hat. "Will you marry me?" Josephine looked past him toward the high pasture. The grass had begun to green around the spring. Snow remained beneath the western timber. Fence rails lay stacked where she had ordered them, not where anyone else thought they should go. "After the first foaling season," she said. "After the first foaling season. The mares remain mine. Yes, the lease remains in my name. Yes." Josephine held his gaze. "When I believe you wrong, you'll hear me say it." Gideon's answer came without hesitation. "I expect to. And you will not decide silence means consent. No." Josephine let the last of the questions settle between them. "Then yes." Gideon took her hand. He did not pull her closer. Their engagement belonged to the future they had chosen, not to a debt either of them needed to repay. On the morning the mares came home, Josephine carried the copper bell to Lark. The old rawhide strap had split beyond repair during the stockyard fire. On a cold evening in March, Josephine and Gideon had cut 3 lengths of softened leather and braided them around a stronger center cord. Josephine chose the pattern. Gideon cut the pieces to the length she named. Neither corrected the other's hands. Now she fastened the new strap beneath Lark's throat. The bell moved once. Clear. No wool around the clapper. The other 5 Mercer mares waited behind her. 6 total, Lark and 5. Gideon rode the exposed side of the trail on a rangy dun gelding, carrying rope, water, and no claim to the lead. 2 Iron Pine hands followed far enough back to help if the trail narrowed, but Josephine chose the pace. The climb into the Sangre de Cristo foothills began under a clean sky. Months earlier, she had crossed ground like this with Danner behind her, the running iron striking her ribs and the bell bound silent beneath her coat. Now the iron remained in county evidence custody. Danner sat behind territorial bars. No rider pursued her. At the first narrow turn, stone rose on one side and shale fell away on the other. Lark slowed. Josephine rested one palm against the mare's neck. "We know this road." Lark stepped forward. The bell rang. The other mares followed. Near the top of the pass, spring runoff had cut across the trail and left one edge soft. The youngest mare stopped, backed 2 steps, and crowded the horse behind her. Gideon could have swung wide and driven her across. He waited. Josephine brought Lark back, turned her toward the firm side, and left open ground beside her. The young mare studied the washout. Lark crossed. The bell sounded once on the far side. The young mare followed without being forced. Mercer High Meadow opened beyond the ridge. Spring water flashed through green grass. Thin bands of snow rested beneath the western trees, but the center of the pasture had warmed. Josephine dismounted and removed Lark's lead rope. The mare walked forward on her own. 5 Mercer mares spread after her and lowered their heads to grass that had waited years for their return. Gideon stopped near the unfinished southern boundary. Stacked rails lay beside the auger and a new iron latch. "Where do you want the first gate?" he asked. Josephine walked the ground. Too low, and snowmelt would rot the posts. Too high, and mares with foals would cross loose stone. She stopped between 2 young cottonwoods and pressed her boot into firm earth. "Here, wide enough for a mare with a foal beside her. Hinge on the uphill post. Yes, it will swing clear of the wash." Gideon set the auger where she had chosen and began to turn it into the soil. Josephine returned to Lark and left the copper bell in place. The mare lifted her head, then moved deeper into the meadow. The other 5 followed. Behind Josephine, Gideon worked on the first gate. Ahead of her, the bell rang across Mercer land.